I'm Roy Thomas, and turn the presentation over to them.
Do I need this microphone, or can everybody hear me?
Use the mic.
Use the mic. Okay, I'll use the mic. I don't know whether Barry is still here or not. I'm looking around. I understand he used my name. And what I want to point out to Barry is that I'm the Saturday night speaker, okay? I get the last word. So, y'all see Barry, you just tell him to buckle up and take it like a man on Saturday night. We've done a lot of photo seminars, and I started out years ago. I would talk about f-stops and shutter speeds and depths of field, and I could see everybody. I'm not going to do that anymore. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, and Lori is going to go into this in depth, the newer, simpler cameras are so good right now that you don't have to understand nearly as much about those kinds of issues as you once did. Just to let you know what the program is, I'm going to talk for a minute about some very basic principles of composition that will apply whether you're taking pictures with your cell phone or a $5,000 Nikon. Very, very simple, but still very useful. Lori's going to talk a little bit about equipment and management of digital images, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about a specific subject, which is what we'll call the success photo, for want of a better term. You've taken an animal, you want to record it. At Traditional Bull Hunter magazine, I look at thousands of these photos every year, and you guys can do better. That's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to give you just a few simple tips that I think will let you take better photographs in general, and specifically related to bow hunting and the moment when everything comes together and you actually, to everybody's amazement, kill an animal with a bow and arrow. So, where's the advance here? Okay, okay. Okay, this is just some basic composition stuff. I would encourage you, you know, a lot of times we get a picture back, we look and we say either, this is really bad, or this is really good. Ask yourself why. What makes a bad picture bad? What makes a good picture good? This is not a good picture. I think we can all agree with that. It was taken a long time ago. A whole bunch of this has nothing to do with anything. The animal's kind of awkwardly positioned. I look the way I usually look. I can't help that. But, and I look at a lot of pictures just like that at the magazine every year. And here's another bad photo. And a lot of this is basic composition. The lower half of this contributes absolutely nothing to the image. And whoever took it, and it was neither me nor Lori, they put the subject right in the tin ring, right in the middle of the frame, which is what everybody tends to do naturally. And it's not like you're going to go to hell if you do that, but I think I can show you some ways to improve that so that you get a more meaningful photograph. Now that looks better just because I cropped out the bottom half of the picture that didn't contribute to anything. As a general rule, I encourage people to have the subject fill the frame, okay? Now you can define the subject however you want. If the subject is the Alaska tundra, you can put everything in. If the subject is this, you really want the subject to occupy most of the frame, and don't waste any of the frame with nothing. Now, here's a very basic principle of, we talked earlier about that tendency to put the camera, the subject, right in the tin ring on the target, and that usually doesn't work very well. And what I encourage people to do is think about what's called the rule of thirds. If you divide each axis, the horizontal axis in thirds, the vertical axis in thirds, and think about those lines and their intersections. And if you look at this, here I am along one of those lines. Here the fish is along one of those lines. The fish's eye is very close to the intersection of one of those lines. And by the way, if you're taking wildlife pictures or even pictures of people, what you want in focus is the eye. A lot of times you won't have enough depth of field to get everything in focus. Just make sure the eye is in focus, and then it'll look as if the whole thing is in focus. But get those important parts lined up near one of these intersections and get the principal subjects lined up. And again, it's really simple, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. And you can do that mentally. You don't need to adjust anything on your camera. Take more verticals. TJ, who was here, actually took this shot. You know, it's really pretty simple. Most people pick up a camera like this and click, and that's called a horizontal format because the long axis of the image lies horizontally. All you gotta do is go like that, and you have a vertical format picture. In the magazine, I would guess that 90% of the photos we receive are horizontal format because that's sort of everybody's instinctive stuff. But some subjects will just lend themselves better to verticals, and magazine photo editors like them because sometimes you've got vertical spaces to fill up. That doesn't have to be a prime consideration for you, but I think you can see how my hands are too big. Okay, got it. You know, I'm standing vertically. The elk's antlers are oriented vertically, and TJ did a good job. He got pretty much a third line there. My eyes about a third line there. That's just a well-composed photo. It's not brilliant, but it's good, and it's better than a lot of what we see. To start up here, adding a little bit of color will really make an image come to life. Now, that's tough for bow hunters because, let's face it, we're usually not trying to be visible. I'm going to give you some tips about that in a minute. It's great for wing shooting because, you know, we always wear flames orange for safety reasons. The other thing about this photo on top is good photos don't just happen. Okay? You've got to think a little bit. One advantage of hunting with a pointing dog is we knew where this bird was, we knew what was going to happen. Roy could swing around behind me, get the sun in the right place, kind of over your shoulder, and actually get the frame, the image framed before the bird flushed. And you know, that's a situation that may not apply for many of you, but it always amazes me. People go on a 2-week hunt, they'll shoot a big moose, they work their ass off for 2 weeks, and they go click, 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 and that's it with the camera. It just takes a little bit more time and thought to get what I consider good photos. And it's easy, and it's fun, and it's cheap. And the reason for this picture is to remind everybody that I never miss. This is our friend Doug Borland. Doug can't be here with us now, I'm sorry. But we talked about adding some color a minute ago and how hard that is for us because we're usually dressed in dull clothes or camouflage. There's the secret to that, and if we go through the success photos later, you'll see a lot of that. Somebody got a question, or we swat flies? Or?
No, I was getting his tips.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Got it. No problem. I think most of us probably shoot bright fletches. I certainly do, because I want to know where the arrow's going. And that's a real easy, unobtrusive, non-artificial way to get a little bit of color into a bow hunting photo. Straighten the horizons. There's 2 things wrong with this picture. One is that the fly is there and the tarpon is there. But here you got this crooked horizon in the background, and that's incredibly distracting. And that'll ruin a lot of pictures if you're not thinking about it. The easiest way to address it is to think about it before you click the shutter. But thanks to... Whoops. Couldn't tell quite what you were trying to tell me there, but... Thanks to the magic of being able to manipulate digital images on a computer, you can fix a lot of this now, but you can't fix it if it's really out of whack. So the easiest thing to do is just to think a little bit about the horizon. If you get it close, you're going to be fine because you can fix it on the computer. Lori?
I would point out that that is actually an old slide, and back in the day, you couldn't fix that.
Yeah, some of these pictures are really old. That's a 30-year-old picture. And when it was a slide, you couldn't do anything with it. No, we digitalized all our old slides, and we can do some work with the digitalized version of the slides. And Lori's going to get into that in detail later. Okay, sweet. Clean up the scene. You know, a lot of it, it's real easy. You're kind of in a hurry. I'm sure you would all agree that having that waterproof bag in the center of that otherwise nice scenic is a big distraction. Again, back in the day, the slide film day, if that was there really wasn't anything you could do about it. But nowadays, Lori with her computer magic can make it go away. It's really incredible what you can get away with now. But the easiest approach is just to look around a little bit, and you'll be amazed how often there's a backpack or there's a gut or something that really just doesn't belong there. And if you can just clean it up at the time, it'll save you a lot of work down the line. Okay, hats. If you're taking pictures of people, the problem is that we're getting older and a lot of us don't have any hair anymore, and everybody wants to wear their hat because they got a bald head. That will inevitably lead to making the subject virtually unrecognizable. And there's a couple of things you can do about that. You can ask your hunting partner just to take the hat off or at least push the brim up. If that doesn't work, you can use some flash. And I'm not going to go into flash. Photography is a little bit complicated. I will talk about it some later. But the easiest way to burn out those shadows is just to hit the flash function on your camera. Now I know a lot of you are going to be using a lot of different kinds of cameras now. I'm going to guess that a lot of them are going to be $300 point and shoots. The amazing thing is that now, those are good cameras. Somewhere on your camera you will have a flash function, I can guarantee you. I can't tell you where it is because there's 30 different kinds of cameras represented here. But learn how to engage your flash. And a lot of times in a situation like this, all you have to do is have the flash on. Now, when you use flash, there are a few complications that go with it. Here, for example, I was close enough so that the antler tines cast shadows up across Don's face too. And there's things you can do that, with, you know, just changing the angle and moving back in or forward. And you don't need to get into great details, but I would encourage you all to find out how to turn the flash on your point and shoot camera. That'll get you out of a lot of difficult
I
places.
didn't realize that also has the eye problem.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that problem later when we go to the success photos. That is an issue, and I'll tell you how to deal with it. Okay, lenses come in different focal lengths. The human eye is, for all intents and purposes, a 50mm lens. In other words, we're seeing the world through a 50mm lens, and that's why a 50mm lens is called a normal lens. You just don't have to do a lot of mental calculations. Longer focal distances are telephotos. Shorter focal lengths are wide angles. You're going to have choices on your camera, even if it's a very simple point and shoot camera. They almost all have 2 or 3 different lens options now, and they may have a lot more. I would encourage you to go out in the backyard and play around with it. Take a picture of a potted plant or your dog or something, and get a feel for what changing the length of that lens does. In this, just for illustrative purposes, Lori stood outside our yard one day. This is, and the only thing I changed, didn't change exposure, didn't move. All I did was change the focal length on the camera. This is a wide angle lens, 24mm lens, and you can see why it's called a wide angle lens. Wide angle lenses can be very, very useful in tight spaces like in a boat or even in a tree stand, but they're very tricky because they make everything look small. You have to be close to your subject to use a wide angle lens. But again, go out in the backyard and take a picture of your dog with a wide angle lens and get a feel for it. What you'll find with wide angle lenses is that you really have to be close to the subject, but in some situations they're great. That's a normal lens. That's just what I saw when I looked at Lori. And this is a 300mm lens. And you'll notice how that telephoto lens doesn't just make her look bigger, it tends to kind of compress everything. And look at the background, okay? I didn't change the aperture at all. All other things being equal, a telephoto lens will have a narrower depth of field, and you can use this creatively. The subject was Lori, so I've effectively isolated the subject, drawn attention to the subject, just by using a lens that blurred out the whole background. And again, this is something, I don't mean to pound this in the ground, but you can learn all about this with experience. Just take your camera out and shoot the same subject with various focal lengths of lenses, and know what you're shooting with. If you've got an animal and you want to take a so-called success picture, think a little bit about what lens you use, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to the success photo. I think Lori.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing. When, especially if people are using your cell phones, be careful when you zoom into things, because if you zoom in with your cell phone, that digitally zooms in, and you already decreased your picture, if you blow it up, is going to be really pixelated because that's digital zoom. And if you have a new iPhone, there's 2 lenses on it. So you can either use 1x or 2x, and that 2x is actually a little zoom lens. So don't go any bigger than 2 because the minute you do that, your pictures are gonna look bad if you blow them up. And I don't think a lot of people know that. Just going like this immediately decreases the resolution.
Yeah, so basic principles of optics. There's no free lunch in photography. If you get something, you got to give something up to get it. If you want a wide depth of field, you know, you're going to have to give up some shutter speed, which means you're going to need more light, as Lori indicated. This is why you just need to go use your camera. It's funny, I used to laugh when people would say for the magazine, you know, I took some pictures with my cell phone, because first generation cell phone pictures were unusable. They were grainy, they didn't have the resolution. And the good news now is that you can take great pictures with a cell phone. Lori and I did a photo essay for Gray Sporting Journal with a cell phone one day. So it's no longer a joke to use a cell phone. And I think Lori's going to talk a little bit about equipment now, so I'll turn it over to her.
Could I ask a question about that last?
Questions anytime.
Is there a time that you would choose like one of those with a wider angle and a higher actual resolution, like 4K or higher, and then doing your editing, grabbing of what you want out of that more?
I'm going to defer that question to Lori because she knows
sorry.
the images once they're taken.
Okay, so
Does that apply sort of back to which lens I would be choosing if I'm trying to choose one at first to do a predominant lot of things with?
Well, in a lot of ways, the most versatile lens is a normal lens, a 50 millimeter lens. And that will require the least manipulation on the computer, all other things being equal. Telephotos will cost you a little bit of resolution if you don't compensate for it by changing the ISO, for example. But let's circle back to that.
Thank you.
We'll have a real question and answer period. I'm not.
No, thank you.
Questions, but let's get this done and then save up your questions and we'll all.
Appreciate that.
I'm not going to waste a lot of time on equipment other than to say that I have a lot of equipment in a lot of drawers in a lot of places, and honestly I have a lot of lenses. I went to a flash photography class that taught me a lot of money and cost me a lot of money, and I usually like to use natural light because it's just easier. I should have put the next slide first. I brought this up because one morning I went out and took a picture of the sunrise, and the upper picture is taken with a $2,000 camera, and the bottom, well, your cell phone is a $1,000 camera now. So, I mean, unless you were really to blow that up, and there's more things you can do with your high-end camera as far as file manipulation, but you know, you can just do pretty well with a cell phone. And a lot of, I've had so many people over the years tell me, you know, I could take better pictures if I had a better camera. And I really don't think that's necessarily the case. So I laid out all of my cameras. The one on the right is a $6,000 Nikon D3. Then there's my mirrorless camera, and the orange one is actually a waterproof Nikon. I don't have one of the little point and shoots because I use the cell phone now, but it's just, you know, there's just a whole bunch of stuff out there, and you can get good pictures with any of them. The one thing you can't get usually with your cell phone is good wildlife photography, and that's just the cost of doing business if you're going to take wildlife photography. That is taken up on the CMR Wildlife Refuge, and it's a great place because they have this little no hunt zone where all the elk just flock in the fall, and they know that you can't step off the road. So it's just covered with photographers with huge lenses, and you can get some amazing stuff, but you can't get close, so you've got to have a big lens. This one is taken close.
Too close.
Too close, maybe. But yeah, that if you're gonna take wildlife photography of some things, you do need to invest in some lenses and better cameras. I won't go into a lot of photo management other than to say, please take your pictures off your cell phone. You know, I know there's a cloud, and it used to be that if you dropped your phone in the toilet, your pictures were all gone, and now they are on the cloud. But honestly, I would encourage people to take their good photos and go to Shutterfly and make a book, because it's just cozier to sit down with a photo book than crouching in front of somebody's cell phone and seeing what they did on their vacation. I do some editing, but honestly, for wildlife and for the worst thing that I see people do is over tweak their photos, you know, that HDR, and professional photographers went through this big deal where everybody just tweaked the heck out of stuff, you know, the colors got so bright they were unrealistic, and I would just kind of try to keep it real. And there's some good photo programs out there. You don't need to be a Photoshop person anymore. There's one called Snapseed that goes for your cell phone that's great. And you just need to keep in mind that sometimes little is better. And try to organize your stuff if you use iPhoto. I'm not really that familiar with some of the other programs. Just put some keywords or keep them by dates just so you can find them. Because once you end up with 100,000 photos, you'll never be able to find anything. And my last thing that I would say on that is you don't need 50 pictures of your white-tailed deer. I mean, pick out your 2 or 3 best ones, put a flag on them, put a heart on them, do whatever, but just edit, you know. You need to call stuff and be ruthless about it, and do it as soon as you get home. Because then, you know, a lot of times if you wait around, you just don't get to it. And then you have so many pictures that you can't get to the ones that you really want to show people, because that's usually about 2 or 3. So I think that, let me see if I have anything else here. Oh, that's just a little bit of editing just to show you how you can take a marginal picture and actually make it look much better.
Okay, as promised, we're going to go back to success shots, whatever you want to call them, when you're trying to photograph the results of a successful hunt. And this is kind of a niche topic, and you know, let's face it, a lot of professional photographers never go shoot anything, so they don't really know how to do it either. And I look at an awful lot of bad success photos at the magazine, and I'm not being critical. You're not going to go to hell. It's just we can't use them in the magazine. And I think you'll find that if you kind of shoot with that standard in mind, you'll wind up enjoying your success photos a lot more too. Okay. That's a big lion, by the way. Biggest lion I ever treated. I let that kid shoot it on his first lion hunt. That was a mistake. Okay, here's another bad photo. Some of the same things we talked about earlier. Rosie took this, so it's no surprise it's a bad photo. Here I am, right in the middle of the frame. Got a bunch of nothing here, got a bunch of nothing there. The light's not very good. And by the way, even though I'm not talking a whole lot about exposure, remember that there are magical moments at the beginning and the end of the day when the harsh nature of natural sunlight is filtered by going through multiple layers of the atmosphere. Photographers call those the golden hours, and it really makes a huge difference. I think I may have a few examples of that as we go through. The problem is that those are also the hours when we're usually busy bow hunting, but sometimes you got to make choices. But I make an effort to be out in the field with my camera at those times, and I think I'll get to show you why.
Here's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Most success photos, the hunter is staring right into the camera. It's just like a wanted poster on the post office wall. And I think you need to decide, and this is up to you, okay, I have no business telling you what you want your photograph to be about, but at some point I like to make a choice. Do I want this to be about me, or do I want it to be about the animal? And I found over the years that the more I make it about the animal, the more I enjoy the photographs later. And of course that has some implications in the magazine business too, because you may be infatuated with yourself, but the general reader is probably going to be more interested in the animal than they are in you. And I've learned that over the years. And here's the simplest thing in the world. Instead of looking right into the camera, look at the animal. It's just one simple little thing. And take both. You know, that's the wonder of digital photography. It doesn't cost anything to take 20 pictures and go back and look at them. You'll have one of both. You may like one more than the other. And this is another example of how you can introduce a little bit of color into a field and liven the photograph up a little bit that way. Now, I don't know how many of you have hunted in Africa. African professional hunters really are professional hunters. They all get a lot of training. They know a tremendous amount about the wildlife, much more than most of the guides. In Montana, the guide is usually just the drunk with the key to the gate these days. These guys are taught very well. And one of the things they're taught is how to take a success photo. And they're all taught exactly the same way. And if you see 100 pictures of a bow hunter with an African animal, they're all going to look like this. The animal's going to be stretched out horizontally, his feet are going to be tucked underneath it, and they know enough to clean up the scene and not have a blood. And that's all fine, but they get really boring after a while. And I always have to kind of take over the scene. For example, they never take verticals, but here we got a subject that clearly is well suited to a vertical format. So I just booted the PH out, and Lori and I took care of our own photos. So use your own imagination. Don't let other people tell you how it has to be done, including me, by the way. And you don't need the whole animal. You know, 90% of the ones I see, there's the hunter, there's the animal. You can make these photos a lot interesting by zeroing in on some small elements of the hunt that remind us of the story. I like to have a photograph that tells a story. And there's lots of components to a successful bow hunt that don't involve the hunter's face or even the animal's horns, or all of them. This is just one example, and let's face it, we've all dragged out deer. This is another example. Again, I'm trying to tell a story here. It's not just about a lump of a dead animal lying on the ground. This was a friend of ours, Lori, put this in. Lori just loved this picture. I'm kind of about it, but we had the kids out tracking this deer down and then dragging it up out of the hill. And I'm a big believer in getting kids and other family members involved in these photos too. Include some background. Now, this is my friend Kevin Lowe from New Zealand. I was guiding him on a bear hunt in southwest Alaska. And let's face it, this is pretty. So in a situation like this, remember I encouraged you to tell yourself, what's the subject of this photo? And it wasn't just Kevin. It was Kevin glassing the Alaska fall tundra. So I framed it appropriately. I used an appropriate f-stop to get a thick slice of depth of field so that you could see a lot of this stuff in the background. Same thing is true here. I was guiding this bear hunter. This is a really big bear, by the way, but I thought, you know, a lot of the interesting part of this isn't just the big bear. It's this is where we hunt fall bears in Alaska, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And the fall tundra is beautiful. That lake is beautiful. I've got lots of stories I can tell you about that lake, and so I wanted to get the whole thing. So I framed it that way, and I adjusted the exposure that way. Animal eye. Here's Lori, as usual, with a buck. We got a little color in it, first of all, and this is just to prove that absolutely 100% of the time during rifle season, we always wear hunter orange. But there were a couple of problems with this. One is, didn't get all the blood off. And these are the same picture, by the way. This is Lori doctored. Usually, if you've got snow on the ground, it's really easy to get rid of blood. You just start scouring it with snow. And I should have picked that up the first time around. This is what generally is known as redeye. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's green. It depends on the animal. Most of you, are you familiar with the redeye function on your automatic camera? Everybody got it? Okay. Well, ask yourself this. How does it work? The redeye function on a point-and-shoot camera works by giving a little puff of light just a millisecond before the shutter trips. That puff of light makes the pupil constrict, so that when the exposure takes place, the pupil is closed and you don't get this reflection off the back of the retina. The only problem is it doesn't work if it's dead, okay? And I got a funny story to tell you about that too, if I have time. But so you've got to compensate for that in one of a number of ways. First of all, I was using flash because she shot this late at night down in the bottom of a coulee and I needed some additional light. That's why I was using flash in the first place. A lot of times if you just change the angle of the animal's head in relationship to the camera, you can get rid of that retinal flash that way, or you can come home and have Lori get rid of it digitally on the computer, which I think was...
You know, most editing programs have a red eye removal function.
Yeah, they do.
I couldn't get that to work here, so it doesn't always work. So don't depend on being able to get rid of that. I had to tweak that a little bit.
Yeah,
because of
yeah.
the eye function. And I think it's because that eye is not red. I noticed
It's not red.
the other day, and it has pet eye, and I don't know if that's what they're referring to, but I'd never seen that term before.
But, well, different retinas are different colors. I learned a long time ago, guiding bear hunters, brown bear have red retinas when you're shining light at them. Foxes have green retinas. And there's a big difference when you're walking down the hill in the middle of the night with a headlight and you see a, we better get ready here. And you know, Lori was talking earlier about not over tweaking your images, and I agree strongly with that. I've seen professional photography from places I know well, and I go, that's not this color doesn't exist there. But this is a good example, I think, of constructive editing. You don't need the blood, and you don't need the eye. And Lori worked her magic, and poof, they're both gone. But don't trust the red eye function on your camera with a dead animal, because it ain't gonna work. Break the rules. Well, you know, we all know that success photos shouldn't be gory, they shouldn't have a lot of blood and guts, and I go to great lengths to clean things up. Fortunately, I do a lot of hunting in snow, and snow makes that very, very easy. In this case, I wanted to break the rules because I was laid up this fall, I couldn't hunt. Lori went out with her bow and shot 2 deer, so we'd have some venison. And Lori always field dresses her own animals. She's been very good about that since day one. And I wanted to tell a story, and the story here was Lori cleans her own animals. So, you know, there are times when you can break a rule. Ordinarily, I wouldn't take a picture like this, but I had a reason for doing it. Okay, here's a, yeah, my friend Doug Borland and I deliberately set this up. We were kind of pulling the chain of a well-known bow hunter with a big grin and a cat. I will not name Chuck's name. And we've all seen zillions of photos like this from him, and a lot of people do this. There's a really easy way to make an animal look huge with a camera. First of all, you use a wide-angle lens, okay? The photographer gets right in front of the animal. You put the hunter way back at the other end of the animal, and this is what you get. Now, Doug's 6'6", okay? This elk rack is not 10 feet wide, I can tell you that. And then ask yourself the question, do I want to do that? I mean, I don't. It's up to you. But if you do, or that's how you do it. Wide angle lens, photographer close to the rack, hunter in back of the animal. Flash photography can be complicated, and I'm not going to give a flash photography seminar. But let's face it, sometimes success photos are taken in the dark because we shoot the animal at last light and it takes an hour to get to it and so on. And in those situations, you will need to use some flash. Fortunately, in most of the point-and-shoot cameras and even your cell phone, the automatic flash function is pretty good. You don't have to do guide numbers. I mean, the old manual days of flash were just a nightmare. But this is an example. This is one of the few times we shoot a lot of deer at our place, and they usually run right to the bottom of the coulee, so we got to drag them all the way up. Lori was smart enough to have this one run downhill in the other direction and into one of our alfalfa fields, so I could actually drive around to it. I'm pointing this out just so you know, you can use your imagination a lot. There's actually 3 sources of light in this picture. Truck's parked over here somewhere, and the headlights are on, so there's one source of light. Lori's got her headlamp on, which really makes a nice little to-do in a lot of low light situations. And then I still needed some flash from the camera. So the picture turned out pretty well, all things considered, but there's at least 3 sources of artificial light going on there. Again, get your camera out, play around with it, learn what you can do with it.
The headlight trick is.
The headlight trick is really good, and we do that a lot when we're duck hunting. Early dawn, not a whole lot of light, some reflection off a pond, putting out decoys. Lori's got her headlamp on. It's a good trick, and you should try it. Get some kids involved. We all talk about getting kids involved in bow hunting. I think it's very, very important. I'll often, when our kids were little, we'd come get them, and we, all work together getting the deer cleaned up. And I think it's just nice to have kids and family and tell the story. That's Ernie Holland. We were taking some people down the moose hunt. Actually, the guys, any of you folks here in this picture today? I sort of lost track of these guys. They were ahead of us. We were cleaning up the camp, came back. We put on the river about 3 days after them and came around the corner, and there's this dead moose lying in the gravel barn. Whoa, and these guys had just shot this moose. And so we kind of stayed together as we floated on down the river. And the moral of the story is you don't need a big sprawled out pile of a dead animal to get a sense of a successful bow hunt. And we've got camaraderie, we've got the rafts, we've got the fall foliage, and you add all that up, and I think it tells a story better than just having a big brown moose. Tell the story. We don't take nearly enough photographs in camp. It's just Doug sharpening a broadhead, but that's an important element of a hunting story. Wading ashore on Kodiak Island prior to a blacktail hunt. Take more of those. I'm sorry to keep talking about the magazine. We can supply photographs of animals, okay? We got live animal photos, and as Lori said earlier, that's one thing that you really do need some specialized equipment to do properly. Don't worry about that. But what we can't do is take these kinds of pictures about your hunt. The stuff around camp, eating over the campfire, glassing up in the hills, those are the things that really tell the story of the hunt, so don't forget them. No.
The other thing that I forgot to mention, and we should all know this, one other thing you can't fix is focus. Yeah. Nobody on a computer can fix an out of focus picture. So keep that in mind, because I see you get out of focus pictures all the time, and you cannot do anything. No, I mean the ones at the magazine. You can't do anything about that. And one thing I can tell you on your cell phone is learn that little trick of putting your finger on the screen, and you can adjust the focus point and you can adjust your exposure. So people forget that you don't have to just point and shoot, that you've got a lot more control on that cell phone than you think.
Good point. I thought you were telling everybody that I take out photos. Nurse Ratchet. Some species are easier to photograph than others. And in general, antlered game is pretty easy because the horns sort of tell the story. They're easy to position, and they're very characteristic of the given animal. Not all species are that easy. I think turkeys are really tough. And I've seen all kinds of pictures where the turkey spread out on a log and its wings are out, and I don't know, it doesn't do that much for me. It's funny, a strutting tom turkey in the spring is one of the most dramatic looking animals, and as soon as you shoot it, it's a pile of feathers, Yeah, you got it. So there's things you can do. The over-the-shoulder shot works, and again, you don't have to have the whole animal in. This tells a story, packing out a turkey. And these are old. Some of these pictures are really old and a little blurry. I'm not saying they're all great, but I think the composition is a good idea. Bears are tough. This is Ray Stallmaster. This is a bear, and this is a huge black bear, by the way. This is an absolute monster. He shot it at last light on a tide flat in Alaska. By the time we got into it, it was 10 o'clock at night. There was no light. I had to use flash. And here's a big lump of a bear. Ray is no GQ model himself. And so I got a huge bear and didn't get very good pictures of it, mostly because of circumstances. Here's Bob Gilbert. I was hunting with Bob in British Columbia a few years ago, and he shot this bear, and Lori was with me then. It always works best when Lori and I are working together because we have different ideas. So instead of winding up with this, I said, let's think about this a little bit. And we found some spring wildflowers, happened to be dandelions. We found an old moose shed, got the bear's head up on the moose shed. And you know, the problem with these animals is their face tends to get down on the ground and you can't even see it. If you pick them up by the scruff of the neck to get it positioned, they go like this. They look like they just had a Botox treatment. So that usually doesn't work very well. But if you can just use your imagination, find something from the scene to get the bear's head up, you'll do a lot better. Tell a story, take a vertical. This is one of my late great hounds. There is a lion. We had a visitor from the East Coast who, long story. First of all, it took him about 2 hours longer than me to get to the tree, and the cat sat there the whole time. And then he got up and shot it through the scruff of the neck, and it bailed off the cliff, never to be seen again. But I had 2 hours while I was waiting for this guy to stagger up the mountain. So I took a lot of pictures, and yeah, this is a wide-angle lens, by the way, so that was the only way I could get the lion and the dog in the same frame. Lemonade out of lemons. I shot this antelope at last light, and as writers like to say, I hit it a little far back. But it was open country, and I followed it for 3 or 4 miles, and I knew it was a lethal hit. And it finally bedded down in the bottom of this coulee, and I watched and watched until dark. It wasn't going anywhere, but it still wasn't 100% dead. So I said, okay, back first thing in the morning. And when I got back first thing in the morning, that's what I had. The coyotes had beat me to it. It looked like a bomb had gone off in this coulee. There was white antelope fur up and down, but go back one, Lori. Yeah, you know, with a little imagination, not a terrible picture, you know, but I don't believe in lying, so I always include the second one too. Your self-timer. All of your cameras. We okay?
Is Dennis done in here?
I haven't seen him.
Dennis done? Yes.
Yeah. All of your point-and-shoot cameras are going to have a self-timer, and what that is a button that you can push. You can put the camera down, push the button. You've got 10, 15 seconds to run around and get into the frame, so you can take pictures of yourself. And let's face it, a lot of us hunt alone a lot of the time. So that's a very useful thing to use. They're a little tricky because you have to guess at what that frame is actually going to include, and it's real easy. I meant to include a picture of me with my head cut off that I took by myself. And this, again, is something you really should play around with in your own backyard. But it's really, really very useful, and once you get the hang of it, you can get a pretty good picture. You know, I mean, this isn't anything brilliant. It's also an old slide that was scanned, but so it's a little grainy. But I got a reasonable composition. I got what I wanted to in the picture. But by all means, learn to use your self-timer. It's a very, very valuable tool. And in general, I like to encourage people to zoom in so that the subject fills the frame. Remember, we talked about that earlier. With a self-timer, it's better to give yourself a little space because you can fix, if you've got this with a lot of stuff around it, you can fix it. If you cut something off important, you're never going to get it back. So, and take a bunch of shots too, you know. I'll probably take 20 or 30 when in a situation like this because you never know exactly what you're going to get. At least with digital cameras now, you can look and see what you got. You couldn't do that back in the film era. This is a kind of funny one. Same elk, same me. It was a hot day. I was by myself. And I would never risk losing meat in order to get a photograph. So first thing I did was open this elk up. Nobody notices that. There's some elk guts, and I just didn't see it. Most people don't either, but the whole message is you still got to clean up the scene, even if you're shooting with a self-timer. That it? Okay. You've been a very patient audience. I hope we haven't bored you. Questions? This is a great time for questions.
I just wanted to add one too that's helped me a ton when you were talking about self-timers.
Yes.
On a lot of the new phone apps, they have the voice recognition, so you could code your word as what you want, say whiskey, and then it takes the shot. So it kind of takes some of that time work guess out of when it's happening. And
Yeah, that's great. As you can tell, I'm always about a generation behind in the technology, but that would be a very useful function. But again, there's no substitute for taking your camera out and using it, because you're going to find things, you're going to go, boy, that wasn't what I thought I was getting. That's a great function. Be very useful. And excuse me, when you're using your self-timer, you got to be sure and get a stable rest for the camera. A backpack will usually work, but just make sure there's not a fold coming up in front of the lens. Gene and Barry Wenzel used to have a little mini tripod. There wasn't much to it, but it was enough so that you could plant it. And I used to use those, and they're good with light cameras. With heavy cameras, they just don't have enough of a stability in the base. But
You
it's
can get little gorilla ones now that
Yeah.
you clamp on a tree.
yeah, absolutely. Sir.
Actually, you just answered my question. I was going to ask you about tripods.
Okay, well I'm glad you did. That's a very interesting point. You know, the longer the lens, the more shake you're going to get. Okay, that's just simple geometry. So back when we were doing a lot of wildlife photography with 400 millimeter lenses, it's almost impossible to handhold that. There actually is a rule of thumb. You need a shutter speed that's equal to or faster than the length of the lens. So if you're shooting a 400 millimeter lens, you have to be able to get a 1/400th of a second shutter speed. That's the stuff I told you I wasn't going to talk about. But back in those days, we had to pack big tripods around with us all the time. It was a nuisance. What's changed that is the image stabilization function in the newer cameras. And it really is amazing. The elk pictures that Lori showed you was taken handheld with a 300 millimeter lens. And if you're looking at lenses and cameras, I would encourage you to be sure to upgrade enough so that you have a good image stabilization system in the camera and the lens. They both have to be compatible. They both have to be talking to each other. And all that is a computer function that takes the shake out. We hardly ever carry a tripod around with us anymore. I do sometimes, but not. It used to be absolutely mandatory if you were shooting a telephoto lens, and we just don't have to do it anymore.
I have one question, Don, if I could. Talking about 300 millimeter versus 400 millimeter versus 5, you know, there's always a trade-off in weight and
Right.
certainly the
Cost,
cost of these lenses.
yes.
Which one would you, if you could only have one, which one would you have?
I'm glad you brought that up right now, because I was just going to say that I have lots of Nikon expensive camera gear at 400 millimeter lens. I have gone for our travel photography to, I use an Olympus mirrorless camera, and it's much smaller. I have a 300 millimeter lens that goes on that's this much bigger, and it's a fraction of the weight. There's like 5-stop image stabilization. I didn't even use a tripod when we went to Africa this year, and I was shooting at, it was a 300, and I had a teleconverter on it. But with these new mirrorless systems, the other thing you can do is you can see what you're going to get with your f-stop in, before you snap the picture, and then you can see it immediately after. It's amazing. So there's no questions, and they're just a fraction of the weight, and people are just dumping their DSLRs and going to this because it's lighter, it's better.
do you guys ever use that in association with gimbals?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Do you ever use that in association with gimbals?
I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to get back to what I think was your original question, I wouldn't shoot wildlife with anything less than a 300 millimeter lens. I think that's kind of the minimum. You're just, even at 200, you're going to be disappointed. And the better, if you've got faster glass, if you've got a 2.8 or even a 4, you can put a teleconverter on it, which at very low cost, can make a 300 millimeter lens into a 450 millimeter lens. And that's basically what we do. Most of ours are 300s, and we do use teleconverters on them.
1.4?
Yeah, 1.4. 2 is usually too much. Too much image degradation. But yeah, we use a lot of 1.4 teleconverters. And that's just a multiplier, basically. It just extends the length of the lens for practical purposes. I think there are any other questions? I don't want to discourage questions. Sir?
Just had one comment on your, Lori mentioned digital zoom.
Uh-huh.
Just to remind everybody, a lot of your almost all of your point and shoots, even the high-end ones, have that feature. And for some reason, the manufacturer always, by default, has that turned on, so that when you hit your maximum optical zoom, it automatically starts digital zooming. So I was recommending people turn that off.
Yeah, for sure. That's why you got to know your camera. Get out and shoot with it.
I was just going to say, when we run out of time, we're going to be sitting in a booth next door, so if anybody has any specific questions or wants to pick up my mirrorless camera, I'll take it to the booth, and any specific questions we're happy to answer all day.
Yeah, I think they're throwing us off the stage.
All right.